We're generally and across the board. And so this session is really going to kind of be, in a lot of ways, kind of general and across the board. Tips, pointers, things that we, Connor and I have kind of tried and done with our own kids and with some other kids as well. But in a lot of ways, and really all of these sessions are really just supposed to be conversation starters. So sitting with folks here, either here in this session or your spouse maybe that's in another session, and just engaging in regular conversation in light of maybe what you've heard or conversed with tonight, okay? So that being said, let's pray, and then we'll jump straight into what we've got tonight, all right? Father, we love you. Thank you for today. Thank you for Jesus, who influences everything we do and who influences definitely our parenting and how we parent and the reasons we parent in those ways, God. So, Father, as we engage in this conversation tonight about gospel-fluent parenting, help us to engage well and just converse well. God, help Connor and myself to converse well and to speak well, Father. And God, just help us to retain some things that we hear, and just help us to have good conversations, to ask questions and things like that as we go, and just converse well. We love you. It's in your name we pray. Amen. All right, so we're going to do this like this. We have 4 questions that we're going to ask and answer as we walk through it, all right? Connor's going to kind of walk through 2 of these. I'm going to walk through 2. If we get to where we want to be at the end of the session, fantastic. If we don't, fantastic. Like I said, the purpose is to kind of engage in conversation. Also, there might not be time for a lot of Q&A at the end of the session, so I would even say, I hope you're okay with this, I would even say if you have a thought or a question on the front, like throughout the time or whatever, just kind of throw your hand in the air, wave it like you just don't care, and ask your question. All right? Fair enough? Okay, so I think the biggest, one of the ways that Connor and I were talking a lot about how to do this is maybe say like, here's our, as we walk through this idea of gospel-fluent parenting, here's the big idea. Here's the big thing, and I realize I'm sitting right in front of the screen. So I'm just going to stand up over here and do that better anyways. We realized that maybe the better way to kind of talk about this idea is to talk about it with a big idea, okay? So here's kind of, we kind of came up with a thesis. Anybody remember what a thesis is? Yeah, that's that high school thing that we had to do when we were writing papers.
Somebody has cold shivers.
I know, right? What's your thesis statement? So that is not the thesis statement. That's not either.
This is our thesis statement. So basically, this is kind of what we want to. The big idea for tonight is this: gospel-fluent parenting can only happen in gospel community. In other words, a lot of us really want to have and really want to be gospel-centered parents. But we want to do that by ourselves. I firmly, as a father, as a student pastor of almost 15 years, I firmly do not believe that can take place. I cannot raise my kids up to love the gospel, to love Jesus, to love the church, to love me as their dad. I cannot do that all by myself. So raising gospel-centered kids takes a gospel-centered community. It takes the church. I've always said I believe it to be absolutely true. It takes a tribe to raise a whole family. And the tribe that we have access to is the church. And so this is kind of our thesis statement that we're going to continually run back to, okay? Those other 2 slides that we had a second ago as well, these are 2 books that we have, Connor and I have read these. Holy camole, like everything that we have pulled through and compiled comes from these 2 books. This first one here is by a guy named Paul David Tripp. It's called Parenting, 14 Gospel Principles That Can Radically Change Your Family. There's a small quote here. He says, very little of our parenting takes place in the grand, significant moments that have stopped us in our tracks and command our full attention. Parenting, or grandparenting, takes place on the fly when we're not really paying attention and are greeted with things that we did not know we were going to be dealing with that day. Right? Holy moly, that's true. It's the repeated cycle of little unplanned moments that is the soul-shaping workroom of parenting. So more information on all of this stuff that we're talking about, absolutely grab a hold of this book. It is a phenomenal resource. The next one is this book here called Gospel Fluency, by a pastor named Jeff Vanderstelt. He says this concerning gospel fluency: in most cases, we
and the people with whom we speak are like ships passing in the night, because we are either giving answers to questions they're not asking, or we're speaking in a language that none of us really understands that well. And so it's this whole idea of we have to be fluent in the gospel, first of all, ourselves, in order to kind of pass that down to our children as we go, okay? So that being said, any questions or comments on the front end? Dig it. Connor, you're up.
Cool. So one of the things that you're going to hear throughout this session when it comes to just what does it look like to be gospel fluent, because that sounds like a really obscure phrase to me. Maybe I'm the only one. It almost sounds like this is a English a second language, gospel a second language class, and you break into your groups and you learn your language and you talk to each other. But in a way, that's what this is. When we are being discipled, when we're growing in our relationship with Christ, we're becoming more fluent in what it means to live according to what Jesus Christ has set before us as an example, right? And so when we parent, if we parent in a way that is completely separated from our faith, then we begin to parent in a divergent way. We parent in a way that's not aligned with the gospel. So starting to think about everything that we do in light of living in the way that God has asked us to live is part of what gospel parenting is all about. And so there's three things that you're probably going to hear us say multiple times. One of those is this: you must build trust. If we are speaking to our kids and trying to speak into them and guide them, and they are watching us live a completely different way, they are never going to accept, understand, or embrace what is being taught to them and what is being asked of them, because we're living a lie in essence, right? So we have to build trust, and build trust means we have to evaluate ourselves as much as we're evaluating our children. We have to change ourselves as much as we're asking our children to. Secondly, we have to build confidence, because having gospel parenting means having conversations that are not always going to be the easiest, or about the easiest subjects, or in the easiest situations. Sometimes it is, but sometimes it's not. It's a continued conversation, and because of that, you have to build confidence not only as a parent but as a believer, and by having community around you to help you not only grow in discipleship, but together you are walking through some of the same things, maybe in totally different ages, but you're still able to have that community to hold you accountable as you hold your children accountable, and they grow together with you. And then third, we're building hope. If there's something that should set us apart as parents from a family that doesn't have a faith walk, it's that we should have hope as we parent. And we should be communicating hope to our children and encouraging them and building them up in a way that makes them also live lives of hope and of faith and of encouragement. So you're going to hear some of those themes all the way through these different questions. So let's start with this first question. How do I engage my kids in gospel conversations? When I thought about this probably 10 years ago, before I had kids, even though I was in ministry and working with students at the time, I still would have thought, well, I'm going to have these devotions and it's going to be great, and I'm going to really sit down and have deep conversations with my children, and it'll be wonderful. Except that your kids too, and you try to have a 30-second devo and they scream and throw the water in your face as you're doing it, right? So what does it look like to engage your children in gospel conversations? First of all, just like Jim Burns said last night, it's a dialogue, not a monologue. Have you ever been speaking with your child, whether in a positive or negative manner, and maybe you are really trying to impart something to them, and at the same time you're doing that, this little voice in your head is going, why are you even talking to them about this? Because I'm not listening to you talk to them about this. And I'm the one talking. Like, you ever had that little voice going on in your head while you're trying to say this and you're like, I really need to say it, and at the same time you're going, I am not being effective? Sometimes it's good to realize that voice isn't the best thing to listen to. Sometimes it is. Sometimes that's saying, hey, maybe this isn't the right angle. Maybe this isn't the right way. Because it's never, again, those grand moments where it's a big aha. It's always in the small moments. Both of my boys, our biggest faith conversations happen 2 times. They either happen right before they went to bed, which is, sometimes the procrastination, but also it's when those deep questions come out and you go, okay, we're not going to bed for a little bit because here's a question. Or when I needed to use the restroom. Because, they're always going to interrupt you when you need to do something important like that, right? But that's the way it is. And so you can either embrace those moments that don't make sense, or you can look for some big moment that's not probably going to appear. So maybe it's your drive to school. You don't turn the radio on and you listen. You listen more than you speak. And why do you listen more than you speak? Because we don't like awkward silence. Our kids don't like awkward silence, and they will fill that awkward silence eventually. And sometimes it leads to questions, which leads to great conversations. So just taking advantage of the little moments you have together, to be engaged with each other. And that's hard. I love my phone, and sometimes my phone needs to go away so that my vision is for my children and for the moments I have with them to engage with them. So we engage by locking in, by focusing on them, by not missing the little times that we have to talk with them. And then also just by listening to them, and again, not trying to answer a question they're not asking, but answering the question they are asking. Any questions about that? Thoughts? Next, how and when do I have these conversations? And this really is more about us than it is about our children, right? We all have little kingdoms, and this is something Paul David Tripp talks about a lot, where we have our inner law firms that are super defensive about everything that we do and like to protect ourselves from evaluating our own weaknesses. And how that can play into these conversations is we can make up all the reasons why we don't want to engage with our kids that day. Maybe we get home from work and we're really tired and we just want to sit down and relax and binge on the newest Netflix show. Or maybe we want to go do this or we want to do that. But our motivation for having conversations is sometimes the most important thing for us to evaluate. If you need to have an important conversation with your child that's a tough thing, are you having that for their betterment, or are you having that because they've offended the way that you look to others and the actions that they've had? Is your agenda to build them up, or is your agenda to make them get in line and do what you want them to do? Because those are two very different conversations about the same subject. I can walk down the hall after I have sent my son to think about a decision that he's made. And if I walk into that room with the motivation, I'm angry at him, and the agenda, I want him to comply, that is going to completely feed into my insecurity about how I am being perceived because of how my son's acting. If he's done the same thing and I walk down the hall knowing that I love my son, that we have all sinned and fallen short of the glory of God, and that there is redemption for him, when I walk into that room, that conversation will probably sound a lot different. And the truth may be communicated in an even more effective way, and actually get to the root of the problem faster. But the motivation, the agenda, and my own insecurity is now no longer in the picture. And it's more about, how am I building up my brother in Christ? How am I helping him to grow from whatever this situation is? And furthermore, the more that I can show my own vulnerability to my sons and my daughters, the more that they are going to begin to have those open conversations with me. And that means when I screw up, I need to be able to say, I'm sorry, Jack, I sinned. Will you forgive me? Man, Caleb, I'm sorry that I ignored you and spent time doing this instead of holding my word to what I said I would do. Will you forgive me? The hows and the whens, they come about because you check your own motivation, your agenda, your insecurity at the door. And you start to have those regular conversations. Yep.
How does that play out? Like,
So, it's a great, yes, right. So that's a great thing, because really I think this probably plays out more in public sometimes than it does at home, right? Right, yeah. So you're in the grocery store and your 2, 4, 16-year-old throws a fit, right? And everyone around is judging you, right? That's where the gut check happens, right? Because then you go, okay, there's a reality to this behavior has to stop, and there's a firmness to that, right? But at the same time, you have to check the boundary of, at what point am I just more embarrassed that they're embarrassing me? You know? And I think there's definitely a line there, and that's not an easy line to say, hey, this is the black and white. I don't think there always is. I don't think there's anything wrong with stopping the behavior. But at the same time, the way in which you stop that might look different because of, we've all been in the grocery store where you're cringing because someone is absolutely destroying their child's character right there because they've thrown a tantrum. When we're all children at some point, right? We've all thrown our tantrums, even as adults. And there's a point to where that goes over a line, right? And for us, we have to be sensitive to that. And that's sometimes where, honestly, those relationships, like for Matthias or Tom to be able to be like, dude, you're back off, like, chill, Those are the times when having people can pour into you and say, hey, I think you need to check your motivation for this. That helps. Now, obviously, in a public situation, that's not always the easiest thing. Your kids are all different. I know that there's a time with Jack, we were like, all right, Jack, see you later. We just started walking down the aisle, And for him, he's like, oh, okay, get up, and fine. Whereas another kid, that might not work. So, that kind of depends. So, well, that's a great question. And finally, and this is another thing that I think Matthias is going to really dive into, regular conversations, daily intentionality. Now, sometimes we try to make this intentional daily conversations. Okay? There's a difference between regular conversations, daily intentionality, and saying, I'm going to have an intentional conversation with you today. Let's sit down and have this intentional conversation. I can guarantee you if you do that, it's not going to turn out that great. But if you are having regular conversations and you are daily being intentional about looking for those opportunities, they will absolutely present themselves.
Okay, so next question that we kind of want to answer in this is as follows. How do I answer tough questions from my kids concerning faith? And hopefully, I really do pray that you've all had at least one challenging question from your child or children concerning faith, something concerning faith, right? How in the world do we actually engage with our kids when it comes to the challenging things concerning faith? Again, this is just 3 very simple ideas. We need to build trust, relational equity, and regular conversations. Why is it, talk to me, why is building trust Why would that be necessary in this whole idea of answering questions, challenging questions concerning faith? Why would that be necessary?
Build your credibility.
Say what?
Build your credibility.
It builds your credibility. Okay, I'm not just the dad who's supposed to have all the answers. Okay, why else is building trust necessary?
Shows your faith.
It shows your faith. Okay. And when I say building trust, I mean building trust between myself and my son or daughter who's asking the question. Okay, that's the trust that I'm talking about there. Okay?
So they come to you and not
So they come to me and not somebody else.
They have to feel
Huge.
safe.
Without a doubt. I tell Jonas all the time, especially concerning sexual things, I tell him all the time, I promise Dad knows more. Okay? I promise Dad knows better. Okay? And that's what it is. And that's what it's so that you come to me, and I'll give you the most honest answer I can possibly give you as well. So why else? Why else is building trust necessary and important? Believability, yeah. Okay? So I think just a few things to add to this, because this is all perfect. There's an honesty that kids can sniff out, right? Especially teenagers. They know when you're throwing them a bunch of BS, don't they? They just know, they get it. They can smell it, they can sniff it out right away. I know that you just want me to comply right now. So they continue to ask what question? Well, why? Why? Well, why? But so when I'm honest with you and I tell you, here's the deal, here's what's going on, okay, I can understand that. And I have a challenge with that because I have a son who's like his mother and wants all the reasons why. Okay? And so I'm answering a ton of questions with him all the time like that. And that has to be a good thing, okay? Not a contentious thing, because of what it does is it's building trust in our relationship, okay? One of the other things that a lack of trust does, okay, one of the things a lack of trust does is that it causes me to run to other places, but it also causes me to sometimes beat around the bush or with situations and circumstances and ideas that I'm not comfortable with. It causes me to beat around the bush. And when I beat around the bush more and more, what are they going to do? They're going to run other places. They're going to find other things and other resources to find the answers that they want, right? No matter what it is, whether it's faith or sexuality or math, okay? They're going to run to other places for these things, right? And so we need to build trust. Okay, the second one, we need to have relational equity. Talk to me again. Why would relational equity with our children be necessary in this conversation about answering questions?
The guy yesterday was saying that sometimes you give and sometimes you have to take away, so you have to give enough to be able to take away.
Yeah. Okay. Why else?
When you have relational equity on small things, it helps you when the big things come along.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Yes. And we have it in the small things. It helps us when the big things come along. Why else?
I think that kids in return offer that back. They offer their honesty and they're going to give you a truthful answer because you've been truthful with them and you have that honest dialogue about fashion and another.
Right. You ever thought about relational equity with your children? You ever thought about that really? Like we talk about relational equity as pastors, we talk about that a lot with people, investing in people. Have you ever really thought about that with your children? So why else? Why else do you think it'd be important?
One of the ways you tell them you care about.
Okay.
I'm investing in you.
Right. Right. And the more that your children see your investment in them, whether it's time, finances, or whatever it might be, the more your children see your investment into their lives, the more likely your children are going to be honest with you right back. All that relational equity. Because sometimes there is a very real reality that I have to look at my 9-year-old son and say, Jonas, today it's just because Dad said so. Okay? And when I'm putting all this relational equity into him anyways, sometimes that just because you're not going to understand if I really flesh it out for you anyways. So let's just go with because I said so this time. Okay. Today that'll be good enough. Make sense? Okay, the third one here is regular conversation, and kind of touched on this a little bit as well. Regular conversation, I firmly believe that this is probably the most necessary thing in our parenting when it comes to any conversation that we want to have with our children. This does not, none of these things can happen without having just regular conversations with our children concerning anything. Hey, why won't my kid talk to me about sex? Well, because you just like all of a sudden one day talk to him about sex. It's just weird for your kid. Why does my kid not want to talk to me about Jesus and all these things? Well, because all of a sudden one day you just want to. And it's just weird for him, right? But the more and more that you just have regular, daily, intentional conversations with your children, just like you do your spouse, just like you do your coworkers, just like you do your parents, the more and more and more and more often that you have these conversations, the more often, first of all, it's going to be easier to have them. Second, we're going to just, all of this relational equity and trust that's built up, we're just going to continue to foster this atmosphere of honesty with one another, right? And it's just going to be a beautiful relationship that we begin to have, right? So all of this is necessary. Building trust, relational equity, and regular conversations, okay? Anything to add on those or questions on those things? Another huge piece of this whole idea of the question itself, how do I answer tough questions from my kids concerning faith? It's impossible to answer tough questions from your kids concerning faith if you yourself are not asking tough questions concerning your faith. Okay? Because you will be caught off guard. Because you're not asking yourself the questions. Okay? When was the last time that you kind of scratched your head about a theology thing? When was the last time you scratched your head a little
Well,
bit
she didn't
about
know
a
where food
doctrinal
pantry was.
statement or
So she like had to
some sort of
Google like the
doctrinal
food
belief that
pantry.
we
Well, she didn't know where
firmly
food
believe in,
pantry was.
right?
So she like had to
You
Google
really
it.
dug it. Wow, the pastor said something that was really funky today. And I'm not just going to throw it off the bus as bad, but I'm going to really dig into that a little bit and see where he's coming from and how that affects me in life. And so it's impossible to answer tough questions from our kids if we're not actively engaging with the Word ourselves, which again comes back to our thesis, doing life in gospel community, right? When we're doing life in gospel community, holy cow, like we're going to be forced to answer tough questions, right? Any other thoughts here? We got one more question. Bruce.
Which is answering tough questions, I agree with that, but sometimes maybe not answering it and saying, let's walk through this together.
Right.
And that might be
Yeah.
a trip away from the home, and maybe you make it fun, and might be talking to somebody else. So you invest time together too,
Yep.
which pays off.
Perfect.
It's not easy, it's not quick.
Yeah.
Any other thoughts here? Questions?
I always found it was harder to get them to even ask a question, get them curious about it, to ask, what is it that can make them be curious to even consider, that option,
To ask the question?
To ask the
Yeah,
question.
super challenging. I think that's sometimes where, so Bill was saying, sometimes I feel like my kids, sometimes they just didn't even come to me or don't come to me with these questions. Like sometimes I feel like the curiosity in the question's not even there. And I think that those are opportunities and time frames where again, us being intentional in the conversation. Like that, we do have a responsibility as mom and dad, not just mom and dad, but spiritual former of our kids. That's not English. But as we do that, our responsibility is to press them into these questions and hard things, right? So sometimes there is a responsibility that we have into doing that as well. Fourth question. I feel like we're rushing. I'm sorry for that, but that's how it is. How do I ensure that my kids understand the gospel? How many of you're looking at this question like, yeah, this one's the most interesting for me, right? Okay? How do I guarantee that my kids understand the gospel? Okay? Anybody interested in this question? Great, because we're not going to answer it because we don't have time.
Yeah.
Just kidding. So there is a tension in this question. What's the tension? For me, the tension in this question is the word ensure. How do I guarantee that my kids understand the gospel of the good news of Jesus Christ? Okay? And here's the reality in that question and in that tension is that we all want a guarantee, don't we? Sure, right? Just generally in life, we look for guarantees, don't we? For whether it's for a car part or tennis shoes or whatever it is, like you long for the guarantee, right? As parents, how do I guarantee that my kids understand the gospel? Is there tension in that? Because a lot of our kids have run away from the gospel, haven't they? It's a struggle of mine to look at my 9-year-old and my 4-year-old and think, oh crap, you might run away from the gospel one day. Right? There's a tension in that. How do I guarantee that you're not going to do that? How do I ensure that you're not going to do that, right? So here's the thing. There's a difference between knowledge and understanding. Okay? And I think this is where we have to really understand and really kind of camp. There's a difference between knowledge and understanding. I can help my children understand and know the gospel of Jesus Christ. This is a knowledge thing. Like I'm helping you understand what it means to believe in Jesus Christ. I'm helping you understand the good news of God, right? Now, you do have a responsibility in all of this stuff, right? So what is my task? What's my job in this whole ensuring, helping you understand the gospel? It's very simply this. It's Proverbs chapter 22, verse 6. We also know Deuteronomy 6. Jim talked about that a lot yesterday, so we're not going to camp there too much. Proverbs 22:6 says this. Train up a child in the way he should go, and when he is old, he will not depart from it. Train up a child in the way he should go. This is my responsibility as dad to my kids. This is your responsibility as mom to your kids. Okay, this is what we do. This is your responsibility as grandma and grandpa to your kids. Okay, even as grandma and grandpa, this is still your responsibility to your kids, and even then to your grandkids as well. You still have a responsibility. We still have a responsibility to our kids and grandkids as we grow up. Okay? My kids are 25 and 26 years old. Fantastic. You still have a responsibility in training up and teaching them the ways of God. Okay? It's not just passed off to somebody else, their pastor or whatever. Like, this is still a conversation that we have here. Okay? This includes training in godliness, training in how I do life together. Okay? All of these things are trainings. Okay? Training up a child in the way he should go is teaching them. It's my responsibility to teach Jonas and Caroline how to walk justly, how to love mercy, and how to walk humbly with God. It's my responsibility to teach my kids how to do that. It's my responsibility as a gospel-loving father to teach my kids how to forgive, right, and ask for forgiveness, right? There is no child in the face of the world that just automatically knows how to give forgiveness and ask for forgiveness. Okay? So it's our responsibility as those who have been forgiven to teach how to forgive.
And sometimes that means that we have to model that and help them learn that. I mean, we actually had a really good example a couple weeks ago with our boys where they had butted heads and just were not speaking, and
Which doesn't happen for Jack and Jonas.
Yes, which doesn't happen for Jack and Jonas very much. And we literally called them, called the Rosericks and said, all right, so Jack and Jonas need to have a conversation because they need to work this out. Because they need to understand what it means to not be in right standing with each other and to have to work that out and talk that out and forgive each other and learn what that feels like, what that conversation looks like, and why it's important. And that's part of us also modeling that if we're in the same boat, we have to model that in front of them so they know this is what that looks like.
And here's why that's important, because how easy is it for you to go to somebody that you've offended and ask for forgiveness today?
Not easy.
But seriously, is it an easy thing for you to do? Here's why I firmly believe this. It's because we've never been taught how to do it. And we've never been encouraged to do it. And when we were encouraged or taught to do it, it was you better apologize for what you just did. Right? I love my parents, and they are gospel-fearing parents, but that's exactly how it was for me. Right? You better apologize for what just happened. As opposed to all of this centers around Jesus. And so let's reconcile one another here. So we're teaching our children how here's the challenge in all of this stuff. Okay? So all of this, I'm training my child. I feel like I have done a fantastic job. Yet, they still prodigal. Right? Or at least I feel like they are. Okay? Some of you have children who are a little bit older now, and they are walking in the ways of the Lord, but when they were a little bit younger, all of my thought processes were, they're going to prodigal. They are so prodigal right now. Right? So I've done everything right, yet my son or my daughter or all of them still prodigal. They run away from the Lord. What do I do? Does that mean that I have failed? Answer that question.
No.
But it feels like it. But does that mean that I've failed? Does that mean that I've done something wrong? What does it mean? Did the church fail? Did your spouse fail? Did the youth pastor fail? Did God fail? What happens when I feel like I've done everything that I could, but they still run away from the gospel? How do we do that? What do we do? How do we engage with that? Here's the thing. It's interesting to me because here's what we do. I think a lot of times when our kids prodigal, okay, and I had a sister who prodigaled for several years, okay, a lot of times what happens when we prodigal is we look for someone or something to pass the blame onto. It's their fault, or that's the reason. If it wasn't for alcohol, if it wasn't for that boy, if it wasn't for that mom and dad who did that to them or showed them that thing, if it wasn't for that school or that car or that, we look for something to pass the blame onto, right? And then as we pass the blame onto that thing, we lay a whole heap of shame upon that thing, don't we? Okay? We lay a whole heap of shame upon our kids as they're walking away from the gospel as well, don't we? It's interesting, if you look at the story of the prodigal son, the prodigal's father, even though we don't have a lot of information about him or what he did, if you look at that story, the prodigal's father never cast blame and never laid shame. What did he do? The dude just loved his kid. The dude just loved his kid, period. He just loved him. And so, really hard question. Connor hit on this a little bit as well, and we're going to finish up here really quickly. A really hard question, even a stone-throwing question, it could be. When our kids prodigal, okay, what is my real concern here? When my kids prodigal, is my concern my kid, or is my concern what my kid's making me look like? That's a stone-throwing question right there, isn't it? Because that sinks like super deep into our souls, doesn't it? It eats at every ounce of pride that is in me. When Jonas does something really wrong, and I'm mad at him, am I mad at him because of the behavior, because of the thing that he's doing, because I feel like he's prodigaling against the gospel of God? Or am I upset with him and mad at him and shaming and blaming and all of these things because you're making me look like an idiot right now? You're making me look like I'm a horrible parent right now, and I am not. Right? So as our kids prodigal, that's a question that we have to answer to ourselves right here. Okay? Where does my pride lay into this? And so here's the last thing I want to leave you with today is this thing. I still don't like the word ensure, but we're going to use it. Okay? I ensure my kids understand the gospel when I continue living the gospel, even if they are prodigal. Okay? This is how I ensure my kids understand the gospel, is when no matter what hits my life, I continue to love it and live it. Okay? No matter what hits my life, I continue to love and live the gospel of Jesus Christ. Okay? This is how my kids, I ensure my kids understand the gospel. Questions or thoughts?
Oh, I'll go back, sorry.
Just briefly, how,
Yeah.
if you have any tips, how does that, you talked about versus persevering, how does something like that play out with a 2-year-old, 3-year-old who doesn't really understand the gospel fully? I mean, we talk about it still, but
My-
one day
even-
she did great, another day
Yeah.
she kept saying, stop praying for me, stop praying for
Yeah.
me. You know, so-
Most definitely. And I would even say that at 2 years old, no matter the age, honestly, no matter the age, and here's the thing, it's not just grocery store situation, my kid's throwing a fit on the floor, right? My patience with my child is showing my child the gospel, but even more than my child seeing and understanding the gospel in my patience towards her, everybody around me is seeing my patience with my child as well, right? And so they're all looking and saying, well, nobody that I know would react like that right now, right? I'm actively parenting. It's not like I'm ignoring them. Actively parenting, but just being patient and kind, right? And as your children grow, and even Allison, I would even say, like, I'm actively telling you why I'm being patient with you, right? I am being patient with you because Jesus is patient with me all the time, right? And using words that the littles understand.
And being on their level. Like, you know, that's one of the things, no matter what our age is, we always like it when people are on our level, right? So physically being on their level. One of the things that I know I have to remind myself of now, having a 1 and 2 year old after not having as many of those ages for a while, is that sometimes I have to be on my knees so that they hear me. Because they don't hear the tall guy. They don't see the tall guy, but they do when he's 18 inches tall. So that
shows you value when you come down to the level.
Any other thoughts or questions about it?
Well, one of the things that's been big with me in the last few years anyway, especially with my kids, if you're going through these situations, the prodigal situations, these type of things, understanding and always falling back and knowing that salvation is of the Lord.
Yeah.
And I know that's from, excuse me, my voice is going down, but a lot of people that can be hard for.
They call that.
Sorry. It's hard.
Without a doubt. Yeah. Without a doubt.
Okay, this is a thought I get. I think you need to be careful. I have a problem equating an understanding of the gospel with proper behavior.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
And I think we need to be careful that we don't mistake good behavior with my kids, okay?
Yeah.
Your kid could be a good prodigal, right?
Well, Tim Keller, when he preached about the prodigal son, he doesn't call it the parable of the prodigal son. It's the parable of two brothers.
Yeah.
Because they were both lost.
Yep.
One was lost in his badness, and one was lost in his goodness.
Right.
But neither one got the gospel.
Yeah. Without a doubt. Yeah. Anything else there? Thoughts, questions? Again, this is kind of just a really big conversation starter in a lot of ways. The goal and the hope is that you kind of grab hold of some ideas and say to somebody in the room, hey, can we talk about how we can do this better? Grab a hold of these books as resources. Walk through one of the resources, one of the books with somebody, and